Hello there and welcome back to War Thunder. Today I want to review this Italian beauty, the Geniere, which is a Soldati class premium battle rating 4.3 rank 3 Italian destroyer. It is a little bit of an oddity since it is the highest premium that you currently can get. And this is an oddity because the Trento is a rank 5 cruiser, so there is no rank 4 cruiser to research it with. So if you have researched the Attilio Regulo and the Bartolomeo Colleoni and you purchase them, then you can research the Trento, but if you then do it with the Geniere, you will have to deal with a penalty on the RP income, which is not good. So the question is this ship worth it? Should you wait for a premium cruiser? And is the Italian tech tree overall worth it, in my opinion? Now, there is just not my opinion, but also a 5-minute guide to the historical career of the ship by the ever awesome Drachinifel. You will find the link to his YouTube channel in the video description down below. And then obviously we will have an in-depth look at the ship, its statistics, and then we know definitely for sure if it is worth it or not. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy.
Italian fleet destroyer design in the 1930s was a fairly iterative process. After the Navigatori class in the late 1920s, the Italian Navy had arrived at an unusual main armament layout of 2 twin mounts, one fore and one aft, for a main battery of 120mm or 4.7-inch guns, and a pair of triple torpedo launchers. This, coupled with relatively high speed and short range, was to be the hallmark of practically all true destroyers that they would then build up until the outbreak of World War II. The differences between classes tended to occur when it came to exact speed and the ancillary armament, anti-aircraft guns, depth charges, mines and the like, as well as a steady trend towards increased displacement. Also relatively unique amongst destroyers was a dedicated gun or two for firing star shells for night operations. These guns were very stubby, usually 15 caliber weapons, and so they could only be used for this purpose and not in battle. The Soldatis were to be the last Italian destroyers that would be built until the 1950s, and so they represented the final iteration of this particular line of thinking. Destroyer size overall had been growing, and these ships were no exception, coming in almost right on target for larger destroyer standard displacement under the treaties at about 1,850 tons. The main armament was 4 120mm or 4.7-inch guns in the 2 twin mounts as previously described, one forward and one aft, with the aft mount being placed high, sitting on part of the aft superstructure, and thus afforded a much better field of fire than the average aft deck level mount. The single star shell gun was placed between the 2 triple torpedo launchers amidships, which themselves were positioned between the funnel and the aft main gun mount. Depth charges and or mines could be carried, whilst anti-aircraft defence was initially provided by a dozen heavy machine guns in 4 twin and 4 single mountings. Changes to this layout would come thick and fast, with the first batch of 12 ships gradually dropping the star shell gun in favour of the new Ansalado 1940 pattern single 120mm full-size gun, and the machine guns being replaced by 4 twin 20mm mounts. The second batch, of which 7 were planned and 5 completed, came with this 5th main gun and the 20mm mounts instead of the machine guns as standard. As the war progressed, heavier 37mm anti-aircraft guns were mounted on some of the surviving ships, replacing either the star shell gun or single 120mm main gun, depending on what happened to be in that position at the time, or the aft triple torpedo tube, depending on the ship in question. Some vessels would have both positions replaced, with the 37mm cannon usually arriving in pairs. As the war progressed, the class would take relatively heavy losses. Out of the 17 that would actually be completed, 3 were lost to bombs, 2 to mines, 2 to torpedoes, 1 to HMS York, 1 to scuttling, and 1 to a storm, for 10 losses out of 17 vessels. The 2 incomplete second batch hulls were captured by the Germans, but neither would enter full service, with one being scrapped and the other being sunk by bombs. Of the 7 surviving vessels, 3 would be sent to France and 2 to the Soviet Union as spoils of war or reparations, depending on exactly what you want to call it, whilst the Carabinieri and Granatieri would be refitted as anti-submarine warfare vessels in the new Italian Navy. As the Soldier class, each ship was named after a different type of soldier. Geniere was named after combat engineers, and as part of the 11th Destroyer Squadron, she would be present at the Battle of Calabria, and then rotate into various fleet deployments in concert with her various sisters, before being sunk on the 1st of March 1943 by American bombers whilst she was in dock in Palermo.
Now let's have a look at the ship in the War Thunder port, and we begin with the armor, and there is no protection for the hull whatsoever. It is very fragile and very thin. The only kind of armor that we have is 12mm of anti-fragmentation armor around the turret mountings, but even that is not really helpful. So you receive a lot of hits on the bridge, which is fairly big, and then you also lose control over the ship. So the ship has little to no protection. Going into the X-ray, we can see that the front and the rear magazine are kind of exactly on the waterline, maybe slightly below the waterline, but again there is no armor plating whatsoever to protect them even internally. Then also there are the fuel tanks high up, and this looks like spaced armor, but effectively you just get set on fire even more so. Then we also have here this ready rack for the 20mm, and that is also completely exposed. And then we have the main battery mounting. So we have a twin in the front and a twin mounting in the back, and then the single mounting here in the middle. And the firing arcs are pretty good. The turret rotation speed is excellent actually. And the thing is, if you lose the turret mounting in the front, which can happen even to 20mm armor piercing rounds, then you lose not just 2/5 of your overall main battery firepower, but you lose all ability to fire forwards. So this is a bit like the USS Phelps, and the overall secondaries that you have is nothing but 20mm. There are 6 twin 20mm, but they don't have the punch of 37s or 40mm, not just versus aircraft with the range and the one-shot potential, but also versus PT boats and also other destroyers. So the ship is a little bit on the weaker side when it comes to survivability and protection, but also the firepower doesn't really seem to be that convincing, since those are not 5-inch guns but 4.7-inch aka 120mm guns. But for what that actually means, how quickly they reload, etc., this has to be looked at right now. At first, let's have a look at the gun handling, and with 5 gun mountings, the Geniere is like kind of slap bang in the middle, but then we have the joint lowest caliber with 120mm aka 4.7 inches. We have also 1,000 rounds of ammunition, which is fairly decent. However, the absolute neck breaker for the ship is the 7.5 second reload for its main battery. That is bad. Not just that ships like the Project 7U Storoini or the IJN-Q Shimo have with their abysmal 6 seconds, a whole 1.5 seconds shorter reload. No, the USS Cowell in particular has almost only a third of the reload, and the Z20 has also less than half the reload. So as you can see, the effective DPM is abysmally bad. 40 shells per minute is the joint worst, again together with the Project 7U Storoini. That is absolutely bad, and this paired with the lowest joint caliber or joint lowest caliber, that's not really setting the tone in a positive way, does it? What is nice about this ship's gun handling is the turret rotation speed and the elevation speed with both 20 degrees per second. So you can get guns on target fairly quickly, but then again you don't have the DPM to really not just surprise the enemy, but to put them down before they can return fire. The gun depression is fairly nice, 10 degrees. The gun elevation is limited to 35 degrees, and that also limits the dual purpose character of those guns. I talked to Drachinifel. It seems like the Geniere is using very old gun models, and they have two-stage ammunition, and the two twin turrets are with their gun breeches so close together that reloading them is not that easy. That explains the horrendous reload speed. Now let's have a look at the torpedoes, and the Geniere has 6 533mm 10km range torpedoes, which have a speed of 70 km per hour. This is obviously with the torpedo mod, and overall they are fairly competitive. They are relatively fast. Obviously they are beaten by a long shot by the Kiyoshima's long lances, although they have been nerfed to quote-unquote only 15 kilometers range. And the warhead is also one of the lightest, and then the ship's displacement, as you can see, is kind of right slap bang in the middle with 2,580 tons. However, it is also the joint slowest destroyer in this comparison with quote-unquote only 65 kilometers per hour, and then we also have the lowest crew compartment. Now I want to give you a resume in between. This is not the final verdict. Before we have a look at the ammunition, please remember, this ship has no armor. This ship has the least amount of crew. It doesn't have any sort of real survivability. It has the least amount of anti-aircraft capabilities, with the dual purpose capabilities not being that great, as well as also only limited to 20mm secondaries. So we also have by far the lowest DPM, the joint lowest DPM, and we have the joint lowest caliber. So let's hope that the ammunition at least is acceptable. So when it comes to the ammunition, I want to begin with the stock 120mm HE Dirimpente. And at first it looks good. Mass velocity is an amazing 950 meters per second, and also the accuracy is quite good. However, again, the TNT equivalent bursting charge lets you down. With only 1.63 kilograms, this is absolutely outrageously bad. Look at the hideout that has, with the same caliber, nearly twice as much, and the USS Cowell almost has twice as much, and especially the comparison with the USS Cowell that has like 2.5 times or nearly 3 times your DPM. It's just outrageous that it also has nearly twice as much TNT equivalent with the stock HE. So also the Cowell has the anti-fragmentation armor, which at this very moment mitigates a lot of the incoming HE damage. And I'm not even kidding when I say that it can kind of absorb also cruiser fire to an extent, with certain shells hitting then the anti-fragmentation armor. So you are outgunned, you are out DPM'd, you're out alpha striked, and also your secondaries are bad. Now let's have a look at the second shell type, and that is the 120mm AP-CBC Perforante, although then it is titled as an AP-HEBC round. It has also an amazing mass velocity, and the bursting charge is 1.3 kilograms, so that is very close to the HE. And also the penetration value with up to 188 millimeters is kind of best in class. Even at range, it can compete with some of the other best AP rounds from other destroyers. So again, it lacks the DPM, but with AP the rules are kind of a bit different. So very often I go back to use the AP or AP-HEBC round to gun down enemy US destroyers. They just take more damage from this, and it's a more reliable weapon. But again, you lack the DPM, and the penetration in a destroyer fight isn't really that important, and even the Z-20 Carl Galster's base use HE is enough to deal with a lot of the light armor plating, let's put it that way. But again, this is probably the best shell type that the Geniere has access to. The third shell type is the 120mm HETF Contra Herrera. And this is practically a flak shell, aka the HE shell, just with a distance or time fuse. Again, amazing mass velocity, but the bursting charge is quite pitiful, and you don't have the DPM to really go after aircraft effectively with this one, and again only 21 millimeters of penetration. So I have a good mixture of armor piercing and high explosive with you, but forget about the flak shell, it's more or less pointless. Now let's come to a little bit of a verdict about this ship, and also parallel to this, a verdict about the Italian naval tech tree as it stands of right now. And in both cases the verdict is very clear: they're not worth it. It's not that the ship is completely pointless, that the ship has absolutely no chance whatsoever, but in a fair, direct head-on fight, you will lose to almost any ship if the opposing commander is at least as good as you are. And a lot of ships just can absolutely out alpha strike and out TPM you. You are the most fragile ship, with the least survivability, with the least DPM, with the least alpha strike. You are an absolutely bad ship, and you have to think about this, that you buy this ship, you're spending money to experience this, and I don't see any sort of buffs incoming, and you have to not just play the ship for a few dozen battles, but probably for hundreds of battles. And so it takes a long time to get to places, and then you have to hope that you are the second line support ship that just can get all the kills. It is a tragic comparison, and I'm not exaggerating. This is by far the worst premium destroyer that you can buy for money. So I think that's actually all that you need to know. I'm not ranting here, but I just have to say that this was absolutely unfun, and that video here is more of a warning rather than a recommendation for the ship. Don't touch it. Don't touch the entirety of the Italian naval tech tree at the moment, because while the destroyers are kind of on the same level, it is the cruisers that are absolutely hilariously awful, with destroyer grade firepower and no armor versus the biggest cruisers that we have right in the game every single game. That is your reward for suffering through probably hundreds of battles with this ship. For me, that is just a waste of time. Significant battle rating reductions, a massive decompression, and kind of alternative targets for ships like this have to find their way into naval forces before I can recommend the ship in the slightest. I love the history about the ships. I know that they were designed for a different purpose, and I know that they are beautiful to look at, but performance wise, they just don't cut it. And that's it for me today. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like, give it. Subscribe if you want to see more. Please check out the link in the video description down below for Drachinifel's YouTube channel, and we'll see each other in the skies, on the battlefields, and on the waves of War Thunder.